For 12 years, I recommended something to my patients that I now think was only half right. Not wrong exactly, but missing something so foundational that the omission changed the results. And I want to tell you what I eventually understood, because it took longer than it should have. I spent those years building a practice around the face, studying how tissue changes, how structure shifts, how the visible signs of time accumulate, and why. The framework I used, the one that most practitioners still use, and that most patients have absorbed without realizing it, placed the face at the center of everything. If the goal is to change how the face looks, you address the face. That seemed obvious. It seemed logical. For a long time, I defended it. What started to unsettle me was something I noticed in patients who came to me for problems that had nothing to do with their faces. Back problems, hip issues, postural complaints. Their sessions were full body fascial work, starting from the feet, working upward. And when I looked at them closely after several sessions, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, something was happening in the face. Not in every case, but in enough cases to be genuinely uncomfortable. The tissue that had been pulling downward in the lower face was sitting differently, softer, less loaded, and nobody had touched it. I spent a long time trying to explain that away. Better sleep, improved circulation, reduced systemic inflammation. There is no shortage of alternative explanations when an observation doesn't fit your model. But the observations kept accumulating. And at some point, the evidence you keep trying to dismiss becomes the evidence you have to explain. What I concluded, and what I want to walk you through today, carefully, is that the face doesn't begin at the face. The structural environment your face lives in starts somewhere else entirely. It starts at the ground, specifically at the space between your heel and the floor. If you can, stand right now, bare feet if possible. Slowly rock your weight backward until your heels press into the floor and your toes begin to lighten. Hold there. Notice where you feel a pull, the back of the calf, behind the knee, along the back of your thigh. If you feel anything above your ankle, that is the system we're going to spend the next 45 minutes examining. That sensation has a direct relationship with how your face sits when you're standing, walking, living your day. And once you understand why, the heel rock, a 45-second practice, will make a different kind of sense than it possibly could have before. Let me be careful and precise about what the conventional model actually says, because it deserves a full hearing before we examine its assumptions. The dominant framework for facial aging works like this. Over time, collagen production slows. This is measurable, cellular, real. The fat pads of the face, which give the cheeks their volume and the eye area its fullness, begin to shift and diminish. The muscles of expression contract thousands of times each day for decades, and where they habitually pull, lines form. The skin, losing its internal scaffolding, begins to move under gravity in ways it previously resisted. This model explains a great deal. It explains why certain interventions produce the results they produce. It explains why faces change differently in people with different sun exposure histories. It explains the sequence of changes most people experience, what shifts first, what follows later. The model has genuine explanatory power, and the treatments it generates are coherent with it. You stimulate collagen, you restore volume, you relax the muscles creating the lines, you reposition tissue that is migrated. Every major category of facial aesthetic intervention traces back to this framework, and each one does what it claims to do at the tissue level where it's applied. I am not here to dismiss that model. I followed it. I taught versions of it. Most of what it describes is real. But there is an assumption buried inside it that I want to examine with you. An assumption so embedded, it was never explicitly argued for. The assumption is that the face is the correct unit of analysis. That what happens in the face begins in the face. That the forces driving visible facial change originate within facial territory. And therefore, facial territory is where efficient intervention occurs. Nobody sat down and proved this. It was the starting point, not the conclusion. The face is where the visible change occurs. The face is where we look. The face is where we treat. What if the unit of analysis was too small? Not entirely wrong, not without value, but incomplete in a way that changes what you do if you saw it clearly. Here's the first assumption I want to examine. The face is structurally independent from what's below the chin. If you pick up a piece of knit fabric, not an analogy yet, just a physical object, and pin one corner to a ceiling, then pull the opposite corner downward, the fabric at the pinned corner changes shape. It doesn't change because anything acted directly on it, it changes because you pulled the other end of the same piece of fabric. Now ask, if all you could see was the pinned corner, and you wanted to change its shape, where would you work? If someone asked you to explain the posterior fascial chain at a dinner party, and I've been asked to do exactly this, usually between the appetizer and the main course, you'd probably reach for something like that. The fabric pinned at the top, pulled at the bottom. It works as far as it goes. The real version is that the fabric is living tissue, one continuous structure running from the bottom of your foot to the front of your skull. And what you do to the bottom end genuinely reorganizes what the top end is doing. That's not an approximation. That is what the tissue is. Let me trace this for you now, plainly, using body landmarks you can find with your own hands. At the bottom of your foot, there is a thick band of connected tissue, connecting your heel bone to the base of your toes. It forms the arch. It gives the foot its structural tension. This tissue connects through the back of the ankle into the tissue surrounding your calf muscle, the large muscle at the back of your lower leg. The connective tissue wrapping the calf doesn't end at the calf. It connects upward, past the back of the knee, into the tissue surrounding the muscles at the back of your thigh. Follow that upward further and you arrive at the hip. And from there, the tissue continues into the flat bone at the base of your spine, the one you can feel by pressing between your hip bones from the back. From there, up along the spine itself, through the thick tissue on both sides of the vertebral column, tissue dense enough to feel through the skin if you press alongside your spine. Continue upward through the neck to the bony ridge at the base of your skull, the prominence you can feel at the back of your head where your neck meets it. That attachment point is not where the tissue ends. The connected tissue at the base of the skull connects to the tissue covering the top of the skull. That tissue continues forward to the forehead and outward to the temples. At the temples, it interfaces with the broad, flat muscle you can feel if you place your fingers just above and in front of your ears and bite down gently. That's the temporal muscle contracting under your fingertips. The temporal muscle has direct connections to the outer orbital region, to the tissue of the outer cheek, to the structures at the corner of the eye. One continuous system, not a metaphor. The tissue actually connects from the bottom of your foot to the front of your face. The thread analogy I used a moment ago is useful. It also understates something important, and I want to be accurate. The posterior chain doesn't terminate at the skull in a single point. The tissue at the back of the skull fans forward and connects to multiple structures. The forehead tissue, the temporal tissue, the outer orbital region, simultaneously. It's less like a thread terminating at one pucker and more like a thread terminating at a gathering point from which multiple areas of the face radiate. The heel is the origin. The face is where the load accumulates, but it accumulates across a region, not at a single spot. Which means when the posterior chain releases length, when the heel anchor lengthens, the effect isn't a lifting of one specific area. It's a decompression of the loading environment for the upper face broadly. Traditions of bodywork that predate our current anatomical vocabulary recognize this pattern without having names for what they were seeing. In classical Thai massage, not abbreviated versions, but the full traditional form, every session begins at the feet. Not because the feet are a convenient or comfortable starting place, but because within that tradition, the feet are understood as the foundation from which everything in the body loads and organizes. Work the tissue at the heel and the sole, and things change in the body above that you haven't directly touched. Practitioners organized entire therapeutic systems around this observation, refined over centuries of working with real bodies and watching what actually happened. In traditional Indian Ayurvedic practice, there is a treatment called Padabhyanga, the application of warm oil to the feet, with specific massage along lines running from the heel through the sole and up into the ankle. The consistent observation across different lineages of this practice, separated by geography and tradition, is that this foot treatment affects the quality of tissue and the sense of ease in parts of the body not directly treated. The connection from ground to the upper body was, in those traditions, not a discovery to be made, but a starting assumption from which everything else followed. These observations didn't come from anatomy textbooks. They came from watching bodies change across thousands of patient interactions across many generations. What kept getting noticed across cultures with no communication with each other was the same thing. The body is not a collection of independent zones. What happens at the bottom affects what exists at the top. Among the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the small number of populations still living as their ancestors did, the average adult spends significant portions of each day in a deep, effortless squat with heels fully on the ground. This is resting behavior, not exercise. The posterior chain, the tissue from the heel through the calf, hamstring, and spine, is maintained in a state of gentle, passive, sustained loading simply by how they rest. Researchers who have studied this population consistently know that the musculoskeletal health characteristics that decline rapidly in chair-sitting populations, posterior chain flexibility, hip mobility, range of motion, do not show the same decline among the Hadza. The body that regularly loads its heels retains posterior chain length that the body in modern footwear and furniture does not. Everything I've just walked through, the heel is the anchor of the posterior chain, the way that chain connects from plantar tissue to skull tissue without interruption, how its resting length determines the mechanical environment your face lives in, all of it runs through one integrated system of releases. I put together something called the Connected Face Protocol, an ebook with 12 fascial release exercises sequenced across 30 days with labeled diagrams showing exactly where to place your hands for each one, in a daily tracking sheet so you can see what's shifting as you go. You'll find it in the description and the pinned comment. Now I want to examine the second assumption. This one took me longer to see because it's more subtle. The first assumption was that the face is the appropriate starting point for facial intervention. The second assumption is this, that where a problem is visible is where the problem originates, and therefore where efficient intervention should occur. When you see a deepening of the fold between your nose and the corner of your mouth, where do you locate the problem? Most of us locate it exactly where it's visible. The fold is there. That is where the problem lives. That is where intervention should happen. But the location where a problem is visible and the location where the force creating it originates are not always the same place. We know this in other areas. Back pain frequently originates from hip mechanics. In the back is simply where the load accumulates into sensation. Knee pain frequently originates from foot mechanics. In the knee is where the accumulated load produces symptoms. The body is a mechanical system that transfers load, and symptoms appear at the most vulnerable point in the load path, not necessarily at the source of the load. Consider what happens during walking. When your heel contacts the ground, that force doesn't stay in your heel. It travels through the structures of the foot, up the leg, through the knee, into the hip, along the spine. The forces are measurable, consistent, and traceable. The body transfers load from its contact point with the ground upward through every connected structure. This is not a theory. It is what bodies do. The same principle explains why a shortened posterior chain influences facial tissue position. The load path from ground to skull is real. You just felt it when you rocked back onto your heels at the beginning of this and felt the pole moving upward. That was not imagination. That was the chain transmitting load. The fold between your nose and the corner of your mouth deepens for multiple reasons. Local collagen loss is one. The descent of the midface fat pad is another. But there's a third factor that almost never enters the conversation. The tissue of the midface sits within a tension field. That tension field is created partly by what's happening locally, the intrinsic tone of the facial muscles, the quality of local connective tissue. But it's also created by what the tissue above and below the face is doing. And below the face extends all the way to the ground. If the tension from the posterior chain below is pulling the skull tissue back and down because the chain is chronically shortened, then the tissue of the midface is in a different mechanical environment than it would be if the chain were at full length. The fold deepens not only because local collagen is diminishing, but because the whole tissue system is shifted posteriorly. Treating the fold directly helps the fold. Changing the environment the fold lives in requires addressing the system. Your jawline is involved in this. Let me be more specific. Your entire lower and midface is involved. The mechanical shift that happens when the posterior chain is shortened doesn't affect one structure in isolation. It shifts the conditions for the whole face simultaneously, because the face sits at the top of one system, not at the top of several independent ones. In capoeira, the Brazilian martial art that traces its roots to West African movement traditions, the fundamental stance involves constant, fluid weight shifting that keeps the heel in active contact with the ground. The heel is never static, never elevated, never offloaded. Practitioners who spend years in this tradition often develop a specific quality of carriage, a lift in the chest and face that instructors describe as the natural result of the body being properly grounded. This is described in the tradition as something close to spiritual alignment. What it has a mechanical correlate for is posterior chain maintenance. When the posterior chain is kept in active, loaded length, the tissue at the upper end of the chain, the skull tissue, the scalp, the temporal area, is decompressed. The face that lives above a lengthened posterior chain sits differently than the face that lives above a shortened one. Whether the practitioners of capoeira knew this anatomically is beside the point. They watched it happen. They built a movement culture around what they observed. If someone asked you to describe the posterior chain's relationship to the face using a transportation analogy, and I've tried this with patients who work in engineering, because sometimes an entirely different domain breaks something open, you might reach for a suspension cable system. The cables at the base of a suspension structure determine the position of everything supported above. Shorten the cables at the base, and the structure above shifts. That works, and it gets at the directionality. The real version is more responsive than any cable. The tissue is alive, and shortening it doesn't simply move the face into a new fixed position. It changes the loading environment the face inhabits continuously, throughout every moment you're upright. The face is not hanging from a cable. It's living at the top of a responsive system, and that system's state changes what gravity does to it every hour of every day. Now let me trace the mechanism in full, because I want you to have the complete picture before we talk about what to do. When the heel is habitually elevated, as it is in virtually all modern footwear, including many shoes marketed as flat, the tissue at the back of the ankle and along the sole of the foot never receives a consistent downward stretch. Month by month, year by year, tissue that is never lengthened begins to shorten. It adapts to the range it's actually used. The calf does the same. The back of the knee does the same. The hamstrings shorten to fit the available length they're asked to work within. The posterior hip tissue follows. The lower back tissue tightens to compensate for the shortening below it. This shortening is cumulative and gradual. You don't feel it happening. By the time it's significant, it feels like your normal state, because it has been your normal state for years. Studies measuring posterior chain flexibility in sedentary versus habitually active populations consistently find meaningful differences in the tissue's available length. The numbers vary by study and population, and I don't want to put a specific figure on something where the range is wide, but the direction doesn't vary. Chair sitting, heel elevated life shortens the posterior chain. The shortening is real and it accumulates. And at the top of that shortened chain, the tissue at the base of the skull is under more tension than it would be if the chain below had its full length. The scalp tissue that connects forward into the forehead is pulled more posteriorly. The temporal tissue is under more tension. The outer orbital region, which the temporal tissue influences, is in a different mechanical environment. Not dramatically, subtly, but constantly, for years. Clinicians who work with both the full body and the face sometimes note an asymmetry in their patients' fascial findings. The side of the posterior chain that is tighter corresponds to the side of the face with slightly more descended tissue. Not always. Faces are complex and many factors contribute, but the pattern appears often enough and consistently enough that the connection is not coincidental. The contrasting picture is this. In a body where the posterior chain maintains its natural length, where the heel tissue is mobile, the calf is not chronically shortened, the tissue from the hip to the skull moves freely, the tissue at the top of the chain is under minimal resting tension from below. Gravity acts on the face, yes. Age acts on the face, yes. But the face is not also resisting a constant background pull from a shortened system below it. The visible difference between these two conditions is not absolute. The face with a lengthened posterior chain does not look 30 years younger than the face with a shortened one. That would be an overstatement, and I won't make it. The difference is in the rate and direction of change. The face living in a decompressed posterior environment changes more slowly because it's not carrying a load that doesn't need to be there. Not a small thing. In a system where you're managing many factors, removing one unnecessary load matters, particularly when the practice required is 45 seconds. Here is the principle I want to give you for working with this, and I say principle deliberately because this is not a protocol of numbered steps. Steps can be followed without understanding. The principle is what makes the practice actually work. The principle is this: restore access to the part of your body that gravity uses as an anchor. The heel is that anchor. When you load the heel, weight settling through the heel bone into the floor, you are asking the tissue at the base of your system to accept the length it has been slowly giving up. Not forced length, not a stretch that creates its own tension. Gravity-weighted, sustained contact with the ground. The principle is allowing, not pulling. This distinction changes everything about how you do the practice. You are not trying to stretch the calf. You are not trying to force the Achilles junction into a range it hasn't been in. You are simply pressing the heel into the floor and staying there, letting gravity do what it does to tissue that is willing to receive it. The heel rock. Stand barefoot on a surface you can feel. Let your arms hang. Don't brace. Move your weight slowly backward until your heels are clearly loaded and your toes are lighter on the floor. Not lifted dramatically, just fractionally lighter. The weight is through the heel bone. Hold there. 45 seconds. Breathe as you normally would. Let your knees stay soft. 45 seconds is not arbitrary. The tissue response to sustained, moderate loading, the point at which connected tissue begins to accept a new length rather than simply springing back, happens somewhere in the 30 to 90 second window, depending on the temperature of the tissue and where the person is starting from. 45 seconds sits reliably in the middle of that range. What you feel during those 45 seconds may vary. Some people feel a pull behind the knee or in the calf immediately. Some feel nothing in the first week. Both are normal and neither predicts whether the practice is working. The tissue response can be occurring below your ability to sense it, particularly if the shortening is long-standing and the input is subtle relative to the adaptation required. After 45 seconds, return your weight to center. Notice if anything is different in the back of the legs, in the neck, in the quality of how your head sits. Some people feel a slight spaciousness at the back of the neck almost immediately. Others notice nothing. What is consistent is what happens across weeks and months of doing this daily. In Bharatanatyam, one of the oldest surviving classical dance forms of South India, young students spend months learning to stand before they learn to move. Not as a preliminary exercise to be abandoned, as the foundational practice that everything else grows from. The instruction given across generations of teachers is something close to this. Your relationship with the ground is the beginning of your relationship with your body. Practitioners who remain active in this tradition into their 60s and 70s often carry themselves with a specific quality, an uprightness, a quality in how the face and head are held that their non-dancing peers do not maintain. The practice begins at the ground. It has always begun at the ground. The companion to the heel rock, the everyday application, is simpler still. When you're standing in line, waiting for the kettle, pausing in conversation, let your attention drop to your feet. Notice where your weight actually lives. Most people, without deliberate attention, carry their weight fractionally forward, toward the balls of the feet. The heels are slightly offloaded. The posterior chain is perpetually slightly underloaded. The deliberate act of returning weight toward the heel during moments of standing still, not dramatically, not in a way that anyone would notice, is the signal to the system that length is available and expected. The system responds to consistent signals. That is what the body does. Here's the part I want to be careful about. The gradient of posterior chain shortening runs consistently in one direction in a contemporary life, towards shortening, unless something deliberately redirects it. This is not a crisis, it is a direction. A gradient running towards shortening, day by day, year by year, contributes to the mechanical environment at the top of the chain. The heel rock redirects the gradient. 45 seconds daily is not enough to undo 30 years of shortening in a month. What it is enough to do is begin to shift the signal. And with consistent signaling, the system begins to shift. The first changes are rarely in the face. The first week, if you feel anything, it's in the calf. A slight reduction in the morning tightness that many people over 50 have accepted as simply how mornings feel. This is the chain starting to respond at its closest point to the input. The second and third weeks, in people who practice consistently, the ease begins to travel upward. The lower back is often next. A reduction in the low-level tension many people carry there without fully noticing it. These are not side effects of the practice. They are the practice working its way up the chain. Around 4 to 6 weeks, and this varies considerably between individuals, some people begin to notice changes at the top. Not a dramatic lift, a decompression. A quality of having less tension in the temporal region, the outer eye area, the forehead. Some describe it as their face feeling less tired. Others can't describe it precisely, only that photographs from this period look different from photographs before. None of this happens on a schedule. The body is not a machine, responding to exact inputs with exact outputs. But the direction is reliable. Load the heel consistently. The posterior chain lengthens incrementally. The skull tissue at the top of that chain receives less resting tension from below. The face that sits above a decompressed posterior chain lives in a different gravitational environment. And over time, in a face, that difference shows. So let me bring this back to you, right now, in your body. At the beginning of this, I asked you to stand and feel the space between your heel and the floor, to feel where the pull traveled up the back of your body. That space is the entry point, not just for this practice, but for a different way of understanding what the face is and where its mechanical environment comes from. Stand up if you can. Press your heels into the floor. Feel the line from the heel, through the calf, through the back of your knee, your thigh, your lower back, traveling up your spine into the base of your skull. Hold that for 45 seconds and let the tissue receive the input. Then notice the face. Not the mirror version of it, the version you can feel from inside, the quality of the tissue at the temples, the sensation at the outer corners of your eyes, the space below your cheekbones. That is the tissue sitting at the top of what you've just worked with. It is different when the system below it is different. That is where it starts, at the space between your heel and the floor. But I want to slow down here because there's a question forming in your mind, and it deserves an honest answer before we go further. The question is, if it's this simple, pressing a heel into a floor, why isn't everyone doing it? Why hasn't a nurse, a physical therapist, a dermatologist mentioned this to you before? The answer isn't a conspiracy, it's a specialization problem. The person who studies your face was trained to look at your face. The person who studies your fascia was trained to look at connective tissue, and usually in the context of athletic performance or chronic pain, not aesthetics. These two fields sit on opposite ends of the same building and rarely walk down the hall to talk to each other. Nobody is hiding this from you. Nobody profits from you not knowing it. It has simply fallen into a gap between specialties, the way so many of the most useful things do. And there's a second reason, a quieter one. This information doesn't sell anything. There's no serum at the end of this explanation. There's no procedure to book. When the mechanism is press your heel into the floor for 45 seconds, consistently, for weeks, there is no business model built around delivering that to you. No urgency, no packaging. The truth about the posterior chain in the face doesn't need to be marketed, so it rarely gets mentioned. And when it is mentioned, it competes for attention against products that spend enormous sums to be remembered instead. So it isn't secret, it's just unprofitable to tell you, which in the world we live in is very close to the same thing. Now, let's go one layer deeper into the mechanism itself, because I want you to understand not just that this works, but why it must work, why it isn't optional or coincidental, but built into the structural logic of the body. Fascia is not a static wrapping. It behaves like a wetsuit made of a material that remembers shape. When one region of that wetsuit is chronically pulled tight, say the calf, from years of heels never fully descending, from shoes with any kind of lift, from sitting for hours with feet tucked under a chair, the tension doesn't stay local. Because the fascia is one continuous sheet, the tightness transmits along lines of least resistance, the way a pulled thread distorts fabric well beyond the point where you're holding it. Anatomists call this continuity the superficial back line, a fascial train running from the sole of the foot, up the back of the calf, behind the knee, up the hamstring, across the sacrum, up the erector muscles of the spine, over the back of the skull, and, this is the part almost nobody outside of manual therapy circles knows, over the top of the head and down into the brow. That line does not stop at the neck. It does not stop at the skull. It continues over the cranium and terminates in the connective tissue of the forehead and the orbital region, the tissue that determines how heavy or light your brow feels, how much resting tension sits at your temples, how your eyes read in a still photograph. This is not metaphorical language. This is descriptive anatomy, documented in fascial dissection studies going back decades, simply not translated into consumer conversation because, as I said, there was no product to attach it to. So when I say the space between your heel and the floor determines something about your face, I am not speaking poetically. I am describing one physical line of tissue under continuous tension running from the bottom of your body to the top. Here is where it becomes personal for almost everyone watching this. Think about your own daily posture for a moment, not in judgment, just in observation. If you spend your day in shoes with any heel elevation, even the small elevation built into most sneakers and dress shoes, your calf muscle spends its entire day in a shortened position. Multiply that across years, and the muscle and the fascia surrounding it adapt to that shortened length as their new resting state. The moment you remove the shoe and try to press the heel flat, you feel resistance, that pull we started with. That resistance isn't injury, it's adaptation. But it's adaptation running upstream, into the very tissue that shapes the resting expression of your face. This is why age has so long been blamed for something that is, in a meaningful percentage of cases, actually a postural accumulation. We assume the face sags because collagen declines, and collagen decline is real. I'm not disputing the biology of aging skin. But collagen decline alone doesn't explain why two people of the same age, the same skin type, the same sun exposure can look meaningfully different in how tired or heavy their face reads. Some of that difference is fascial tension, accumulated from the ground up. And fascial tension is one of the only aging-associated factors that is meaningfully within your control at any age, starting today. I want to give you the full daily practice now, not just the standing exercise we opened with, but the complete sequence, because 45 seconds of heel pressure is the doorway, not the whole house. Begin as we did, standing with the heels planted, feeling the line travel upward for 45 seconds. Then move into the second position, a standing calf stretch against a wall. Front foot forward, back leg straight, back heel pressed into the floor, holding for 60 seconds per side. This is where the actual lengthening work happens. The calf and the Achilles under sustained, gentle load, sending a release signal up the chain, rather than the brief compression signal of simply standing. From there, a seated forward fold, knees soft, not locked, reaching toward the feet, letting the hamstrings and the lower back round gently into the stretch. This is the middle of the chain, the section connecting the lower body signal to the upper body. Hold this for a slow count of 60 as well, breathing into the back of the ribs rather than the chest, because breath into the back is what actually signals the nervous system to allow the fascia to yield instead of guard. Then, the piece most people skip because it feels unrelated. A chin tuck combined with a gentle upward gaze release, sitting or standing, drawing the chin back as though making a double chin on purpose, holding for 10 seconds, then releasing and letting the head float upward as though a string from the crown is lifting it. This decompresses the very top of the chain, the suboccipital region at the base of the skull, which is often where years of forward head posture, the posture of looking at screens, has created the tightest knot in the entire line. Releasing this point is frequently where people report the most immediate sensation of change around the eyes and temples, because this is the last junction before the tension reaches the face itself. 5 minutes. That's the complete sequence. 5 minutes, once daily, ideally in the morning before the tissue has spent a day accumulating the compensations of shoes, chairs, and screens. I want to address consistency, because this is where most people lose the benefit before they ever see it. Fascia does not respond to intensity. It responds to duration and frequency. A single 40-minute stretching session once a week will do almost nothing, because fascia remodels through sustained, repeated, moderate signal, not through occasional maximal effort. This is the opposite of how we're trained to think about fitness, where more effort usually means more result. Here, 5 minutes daily will outperform 40 minutes weekly, every time, because the tissue is being asked to slowly renegotiate its resting length, not to be shocked into a temporary change that reverts by tomorrow. This is also why so many people who try fascial stretching for a week and quit never see anything. They were never going to on that timeline. I told you earlier that the fastest visible signal is at the calf in the first week. I want to be honest about the upper timeline too. For some people, especially those who have spent decades in the postural patterns we've been describing, decades in heeled shoes, decades hunched over desks, 6 weeks is optimistic. It may be 10 weeks. It may be 12. The body that took 30 years to accumulate this tension is not obligated to release it in 30 days. But I have never, in observing this practice across the people who've written to me about it, seen someone maintain it consistently for 12 weeks and report no change at all. The direction is reliable, even when the exact timeline is not. Let me also tell you what this practice will not do, because I think you deserve that honesty as much as the encouragement. This will not replace collagen you've genuinely lost. It will not undo sun damage sitting in the skin itself. It will not change bone structure. If your concern is primarily about skin texture, about sunspots, about deep static wrinkles that are present even at rest with no fascial tension at all, this practice is not the tool for that problem, and I would be doing you a disservice to suggest otherwise. What this addresses specifically is the tension-driven component of facial appearance, the heaviness, the pulled down quality, the tired reading that so many people carry even when they've slept well and are in that moment not actually tired. That component is real. It is measurable in fascial research, and it is the piece within your control. I also want to say something about why I framed this as starting at the heel instead of simply telling you to do a face-focused routine, because there are jaw and cheek exercises everywhere online, and you may wonder why I didn't just give you one of those instead. The reason is this: working directly on the face without addressing the tension arriving from below is like repainting a wall that has a structural crack behind it. You can smooth the surface temporarily, But the force causing the distortion is still there, still pulling, and it will show again. Bottom up is not a stylistic choice in this practice. It's the only sequence that matches how the tissue is actually organized. Anyone offering you a face-only fix for a whole chain problem is offering you a temporary result, however sincerely. There's one more layer I want to add, because it changes how you should think about this going forward, past today. Fascia doesn't just carry mechanical tension. It carries a kind of memory of the postures and stresses we've repeated most often. This is why people who've gone through prolonged periods of stress, of shallow protective breathing, of literally bracing the body against difficulty, often carry that history visibly in the face long after the stressful period has ended. The face is not just a record of years. It's a record of postures, physical and in a sense emotional, held long enough to become structural. This is not a claim I make lightly, and it is not an invitation to blame yourself for how you've carried stress. It's simply another reason this practice works on more than the purely physical level. When you release the base of the skull, when you let the shoulders drop from where they've been quietly guarding for years, you are not only lengthening tissue, you are giving the body permission to stop bracing. And a face that has stopped bracing reads, to anyone looking at it, as lighter, because it is. I'll leave you with the practical version of everything we've covered, so you can act on it starting today, rather than simply having listened to it. Once daily, morning is best, but any consistent time works. Stand with your heels flat. Feel the line travel upward for 45 seconds. Move into the wall calf stretch, 60 seconds per side. Fold forward gently at the hips, knees soft, 60 seconds, breathing into your back ribs. Finish with the chin tuck and crown release. 10 seconds of tuck, followed by a slow float upward, repeated 3 times. 5 minutes. That's the whole practice. Do it before you look in a mirror, not after, because the sensation from inside the tissue is the information that matters here. The mirror will simply confirm, weeks later, what you already felt. And when you do stand there afterward, tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, notice the same thing we started with. The space between your heel and the floor. Whether it's still resisting, or whether it's beginning, quietly, to close. That space was never really about your feet. It was the first inch of a line that ends, eventually, at your eyes.